echoes of the Teutoburg Augustus's fear. As the Roman Empire continued its relentless march across Europe, it was often met with resistance. Yet no rebellion could have prepared Rome for the disaster that was about to unfold in the dense forests of Germania. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest was not just a military defeat. It was a humiliating blow that sent shockwaves through the empire and left a deep scar in the collective Roman consciousness. This narrative is sponsored by Polly Speaks For You. The creator of Polly Speaks For You has always been passionate about empowering individuals, especially those with disabilities or learning challenges, through text-to-speech and voice recognition technology. Polly Speaks For You isn't just a tool. It's a bridge for people to communicate and interact with the world in a meaningful way. By blending historical storytelling with cutting-edge tech, the creator showcases how powerful a voice can be, whether telling your own story or preserving history. So hit that like, share, and subscribe button now. Now back to the story. The story begins with Publius Quinctilius Varus, a Roman general who had been entrusted with maintaining peace in the newly annexed provinces of Germania. Varus was a seasoned officer, but unlike many of his contemporaries, his career had been largely spent in administrative roles. He was not known for battlefield brilliance, and perhaps that combined with his misplaced trust in his Germanic ally would be his undoing. Arminius, the man who would destroy Varus and his legions, had once been a Roman ally. Born into the Cherusei tribe, Arminius had been sent to Rome as a child, where he was raised as part of a diplomatic program. He received Roman military training, rising to the rank of an eques, a cavalry officer in the Roman army. During his time in Rome, Arminius was exposed to the disciplined structure of the legions, the strategies that made the Romans so formidable, and most importantly, he learned the weaknesses of Roman command. Yet beneath this Roman veneer, Arminius's heart never swayed from his Germanic roots. He returned to his homeland, where he secretly forged alliances with other tribes, all with one goal in mind: to expel the Romans from Germania and preserve the freedom of his people. The betrayal. In the years leading up to the disaster, Arminius had convinced Varus to march deeper into Germania. The general, feeling secure in his command and trusting his Germanic officer, had no reason to suspect that he was being led into a trap. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, who wrote decades later, the Romans thought they had pacified the Germans with their treaties, but it was a lie that served only to mask the brewing storm of rebellion. On the morning of the fateful march, Arminius's forces had already positioned themselves in the dense woods, ready to spring their trap. As the Romans moved through the narrow corridors of the Teutoburg Forest, the Germanic warriors attacked with deadly precision. They were armed with long spears and axes, attacking from all directions, an ambush so well executed that the Romans never stood a chance. Roman writers and their accounts. The ancient Roman writers, though writing years after the event, still carried the weight of the Roman psyche in their accounts of this great defeat. The most well-known of these is Tacitus, whose annals provide a detailed, albeit later, account of the battle. Tacitus, writing almost 50 years after the event, reflects on the devastation with palpable sorrow. He paints the battle as not just a military defeat, but as a turning point in Roman history. He writes, "The fate of the legions was sealed when they marched blindly into the woods, not realizing that the very man who had sworn loyalty to Rome was preparing to deliver the greatest blow the empire had ever known." The Roman historian Velleius Paterculus, who served as an officer in the Roman army, also commented on the defeat in his History of Rome. He writes of the shock in Rome following the news, describing how the people could not comprehend the disaster. Such was the horror that a sense of grief more akin to the loss of an emperor than of soldiers overwhelmed the Roman heart. His account, though less detailed than Tacitus's, underscores the profound impact the defeat had on the Roman psyche. The Roman Emperor Augustus, according to both Tacitus and Suetonius, was devastated by the loss. Suetonius, in his Lives of the Caesars, recounts that Augustus, upon hearing the news of the destruction, retreated into his private chambers, shouting repeatedly, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." His sorrow was so great that he withdrew from public view for days, his face drawn with grief and rage. Tacitus gives a more intimate portrayal of Augustus's reaction, describing how the emperor's voice faltered as he received the news. The loss of the legions was a blow that no victory could ever offset. Even the finest Roman army was destroyed in a moment, and the empire was left vulnerable. Tacitus, known for his piercing critiques of imperial authority, implies that the disaster left Augustus shaken to his core, altering his approach to further expansion into Germania. The aftermath. The immediate aftermath of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest was grim. The surviving Roman soldiers, broken and scattered, returned to their lines only to face the wrath of their superiors. Roman authorities scrambled to deal with the consequences, and Augustus, realizing the gravity of the situation, ordered a series of punitive expeditions to reassert Roman control over the Rhine region. However, the psychological damage had already been done. The Roman Empire, a seemingly indomitable force, had been humbled by a group of tribes united under the banner of one of their own, Arminius. Tacitus, in his reflections, remarks, "The defeat did not only halt the expansion of the empire, but it reversed the fortunes of those who sought to lead Rome to even greater glory." The Germans, who had long been seen as a lesser people, had shown the world that even the greatest empire could falter. The fate of Arminius was also tragic in its own right. Though victorious, he would never be able to fully unite the Germanic tribes in the long term. According to Tacitus, internal divisions among the tribes eventually led to his downfall. Arminius was betrayed by members of his own family and eventually murdered by his own people. In the end, even as the Roman Empire reeled from its loss, Arminius was remembered more for his betrayal than for his triumph. In the aftermath of the catastrophic defeat in the Teutoburg Forest, Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, found himself gripped by a fear unlike anything he had experienced before. His empire, so vast and seemingly invincible, had been humbled by a few thousand Germanic warriors under the leadership of one man, Arminius, a former ally turned traitor. The loss of 3 Roman legions, an event so disastrous it echoed through the halls of power in Rome, shattered the belief in Roman superiority that had been the cornerstone of the empire's expansion. Augustus's thoughts and fears. The fear that crept into Augustus's heart was not just one of military defeat, but a deeper, more existential terror. The fear that Rome's dominance could be questioned, that its hold over the known world was not as unassailable as it seemed. Augustus had spent years consolidating his power, transforming Rome from a republic rife with civil war into an empire with a strong central authority. He had worked tirelessly to cement his legacy, presenting himself as the savior of Rome, the bringer of peace after decades of bloodshed. But now, for the first time, Augustus faced the possibility that his empire could unravel. The moment of shock. When word of the disaster reached Rome, Augustus was in his private chambers, awaiting a report from his generals. The messenger, pale and trembling, delivered the news in hushed tones. The legions under Varus, they had been lost, annihilated in the forests of Germania. The room seemed to darken as Augustus took in the full weight of the message. Tacitus, writing years later, described Augustus as being momentarily struck dumb. For the first time in his life, the emperor's demeanor betrayed his fear, his confidence shattered by a blow he had not anticipated. Augustus's mind raced. The loss of these legions represented more than just the death of 20,000 men. It was a direct challenge to the empire's might. What if the Germanic tribes are not as easily cowed as we thought? What if the peace I have fought for all these years is an illusion? Augustus feared that the idea of Roman invincibility was crumbling piece by piece. As the day wore on, Augustus became consumed by the thought that this defeat might be a signal of something far greater, an omen that the empire's reach had finally exceeded its grasp. The Roman historian Suetonius recounts that Augustus, unable to bear the weight of his thoughts, would often stand before his mirror, muttering to himself, "Varus, give me back my legions." His voice was said to tremble, his eyes haunted by the image of the men lost in the Teutoburg Forest. The emperor's nightmares. In the weeks following the battle, Augustus's fear deepened. At night, he was plagued by restless dreams. He dreamed of the legions marching into Germania, their armor shining in the cold mist of the Teutoburg forest. But then the dreams twisted, turning into nightmares as Roman soldiers fell one by one to the arrows and axes of their Germanic attackers. In the dark of the night, Augustus would awaken with a start, drenched in sweat, hearing the cries of his soldiers as they were slaughtered. These nightmares were not just about the loss of men, they were about the loss of control. Augustus feared that his power, built over decades, might unravel. Tacitus notes that the emperor became increasingly withdrawn, his once formidable confidence replaced by a palpable sense of vulnerability. The man who had once commanded legions in battle now seemed paralyzed by the realization that his empire was not as invincible as he had believed. A crisis of authority. Augustus's fear manifested not only in his private moments but also in his public decisions. The emperor, who had once expanded Rome's borders with confidence, now recoiled from further military campaigns beyond the Rhine. In the wake of the defeat, he ordered the legions stationed on the empire's frontiers to fortify their positions and cease any aggressive actions toward Germania. He feared that another failure could push Rome into crisis, both internally, as the populace questioned his leadership, and externally, as neighboring nations began to see Rome's weakness. The historian Velleius Paterculus, who served in the Roman army, writes that Augustus began to doubt whether he had made the right decisions in his quest for empire. Augustus, having seen the devastation wrought by the Germans, became wary of overextension. The Romans were no longer the unchallenged masters of the world. What if they could be defeated by tribes that had never been properly understood? In his attempt to shore up Rome's stability, Augustus turned inward. He invested more in consolidating power within the empire, strengthening its institutions, and making overtures to the military to ensure their loyalty. Augustus, for the first time, seemed more preoccupied with defending Rome's borders than expanding them. This shift in focus reflected a man grappling with the harsh reality that empire building comes with enormous risks, and sometimes, even the mightiest power can be brought low. Fear among the Senate and the people. Rome's response to the defeat was a mixture of shock and fear. The Senate, once a body of great influence, found itself on edge as news of the disaster spread. Senators who had long supported Augustus's aggressive expansionism began to question whether the costs of empire were too great. Some even began to whisper about the possibility of seeking peace with the Germanic tribes, something unimaginable just months before. If Rome could be defeated here, they reasoned, how much longer could we maintain control over our far-flung territories? The people of Rome, who had long seen Augustus as the figure who brought peace and prosperity, now looked to him with growing anxiety. The loss of the legions marked a shift in the public perception. Where once Augustus had been seen as a god among men, his human frailty now began to show through. A new understanding of power. As the months passed, Augustus's fears began to solidify into a new understanding of the limits of power. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest had shown him that Rome's military dominance could be shattered by even a single, well-timed blow. For the first time, Augustus grasped that true power did not lie in the ability to expand forever, but in the ability to defend what had been built. Tacitus concludes his account with a sobering reflection on Augustus's transformation. The emperor, who had once sought to extend the borders of Rome to the edges of the known world, now found himself questioning whether such ambitions were worth the cost. The Romans had learned, in the harshest of ways, that the earth itself could rebel against their rule. Augustus never fully recovered from the psychological scars of the Teutoburg Forest. His fear of being overthrown, of losing Rome's empire, and of his own limitations remained with him for the rest of his life. His death, years later, marked the end of an era, but the fear that had entered his heart lived on in the empire he left behind. The loss at Teutoburg had not only shaped the future of Germania, but had irrevocably altered the course of Rome's destiny. For Augustus, the greatest conqueror of his time, the empire's fragility had become all too real, a legacy of defiance. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest marked a defining moment not just in Roman history, but in the history of the Germanic tribes. In a world dominated by the might of Rome, Arminius' success was a beacon of hope for those who sought to preserve their independence. The battle was more than a military victory. It was a symbol of resistance against an empire that had long seemed invincible. The Roman writers of the period did their best to convey the magnitude of the loss, but none could fully capture the emotional impact the defeat had on the empire. Augustus may have regained control of the Rhine after a time, but the spirit of the Teutoburg forest could never be erased. The names of Varus, Arminius, and the legions lost in that brutal forest would forever remain etched in the annals of history, a reminder that even the most powerful empires can be humbled by a clever and determined foe. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. To learn more about South Africa's leading accessibility software, visit www.polispeaks4u.co.za and support this meaningful dyslexic initiative.